Welcome to those of you who have already logged in to today's call. We have almost 900 people who have registered for this call, so we're going to give it a minute provide time for folks to log in. So we'll be back shortly. We can see that people are still logging in to today's call, so we'll give it another half minute or so to give everybody a chance to log in. Back in a minute. Okay, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to all of you to today's National HoUSed campaign call for universal, stable, affordable housing. We have a great call lined up for you today. We're going to be providing the latest updates from Capitol Hill, especially related to the bold housing investments and the infrastructure and spending package released last week by the House Financial Services Committee. We have guests from the University of California, Berkeley, the City of San Diego, the City and County of Denver, who will discuss how to reduce the stigma associated with participation in emergency rental assistance programs. We'll also get the latest from NLIHC's emergency rental assistance spending, tracking, and our dashboard updates. We'll hear updates from the field and more. I just wanted to share with everybody that Diane Yentel, our CEO, testified at a hearing on Friday, September 10th, held by the House Financial Services Committee, titled Protecting Renters During the Pandemic, Reviewing Reforms to Expedite Emergency Rental Assistance. Diane emphasized the urgency of distributing emergency rental assistance funds quickly and equitably, particularly after the expiration of the CDC eviction moratorium. Diane highlighted best practices in high-performing emergency rental assistance programs and many ERA programs' failure to adopt such practices in their program design and implementation, including self-attestation and direct-to-tenant assistance. She also discussed steps the Biden administration could take to protect renters from eviction, including imposing an eviction moratorium and federally assisted housing. If you want to read more about her testimony and about the hearing in general, we've got a write-up on it in today's memo to members and partners, which you should already have in your inboxes. So I encourage you to take a look at that. We have a lot of really important news to share with you, so we're going to jump right in. I do want to just remind everybody to please, if you have a question for one of our speakers or panels, please enter those questions in the Q&A box that you see at the bottom of your screen. You can use the chat function for communicating with one another, for sharing links, whatever, but we will use the Q&A box for questions, and I encourage you to submit your questions with your name associated with them rather than as anonymous. So we will go ahead and get started, and I will turn the ball now to Sarah Stadian, NLIHC Vice President for Public Policy, who will talk about advancing the long-term housing solutions in the infrastructure spending bill new legislation to improve emergency rental assistance spending, and more. So without further ado, Sarah, I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Well, I have a big update for folks this week. There's a lot of action happening in Capitol Hill, and I want to make sure that you know all of the details about what's moving forward. I'll start with the infrastructure bill first. So this week, or at least today, I'll say, there are 5 different committees that are planning to vote on their infrastructure bills. 3 more are going to happen tomorrow. Everybody is working on their individual pieces of legislation that will later be combined into a broader, comprehensive infrastructure and economic recovery package. The House Financial Services Committee has already started to vote on their bill. They have been hearing about amendments from about 12:30 today. They're going to continue through the evening. They may vote on the final bill this evening. It might get pushed over to tomorrow, but we're paying very close attention to what's happening in the committee right now. In terms of where things stand with this infrastructure bill, I just want to point out how remarkable it really is. There's about $330 billion in housing investments in the bill that's going through the House Financial Services Committee. That includes really robust funding for our priorities as part of the House campaign. So that includes $90 billion for rental assistance, $80 billion for public housing, and $37 billion for the Housing Trust Fund. These 3 items, 3 pieces of 3 priorities that we've all been pushing for, they are the largest line items in the entire bill, and they account for about 60% of the total allocation for the committee. So, so far we've been very successful, all of us together, advocating for these resources. I do want to share a couple of details about each of them that might be helpful for you guys. Of the $90 billion that's provided for rental assistance, $75 billion is for housing choice vouchers. I want to share a little bit about the targeting within that program. $48 billion is set aside for extremely low-income households, and another $24 billion is for households that are experiencing or at risk of homelessness, survivors of domestic violence, and victims of trafficking. Other resources that were in the bill that we encouraged the committee to include were $750 million for mobility counseling. This is for voucher holders and their families, including families with children, so that they can move to areas of their choice. $500 million is set aside for tenant protection vouchers, and another $500 million is for landlord outreach and recruitment, specifically in areas with lower poverty rates. The remaining $15 billion, that's right, $15 billion for rental assistance goes through project-based rental assistance, and that's those resources are prioritizing housing that's located in high opportunity areas that are experiencing economic growth or rising housing costs in order to help prevent displacement, or projects that serve people experiencing homelessness, or that integrate housing that is accessible to people with disabilities. In terms of public housing, there's $80 billion for public housing. I mentioned earlier, a very small amount of that goes through the Public Housing Capital Fund. Most of it goes to the secretary to decide how to deploy. There's a lot of flexibility there. The intention is really to make sure that that places that have the greatest needs are receiving their resources. We know that the regular public housing formula would undercount basically, or underfund NYCHA and other large PHAs. So there's a need for flexibility there that's included in the bill. These dollars are exempted from the Faircloth Amendment, which has been put in place to limit the net number of public housing units that a PHA can own. And the bill directs grantees, directs PHAs to really focus on the health and safety and environmental hazards that they might have in their public housing first, because they want to prioritize those investments. And lastly, I'll say a word about the Housing Trust Fund resources. I mentioned $37 billion is for the Housing Trust Fund, but it's a little bit wonkier than that. Those dollars are actually funneled through the home program, but for Housing Trust Fund grantees, Housing Trust Fund activities. It's it's a roundabout way of sort of getting at the same thing. We're okay with the language. I want you guys to know that we don't see any issue with this. The committee and the Biden administration were trying to solve some other issues that were going on. The most important thing is that the resources are there for people with the very lowest incomes, and that is still the case for this housing trust fund investment. Other investments in the bill include $35 billion for the regular home program, $9.6 billion for a new housing investment fund that will be funneled through the Capital Magnet Fund. There's $10 billion to address healthy housing and lead hazards, $8.5 billion for community development block grants, $7.5 billion for a new community restoration and revitalization fund, $6 billion for green housing, $5 billion for rural housing, $4.5 billion for zoning issues, $2.5 billion for Section 202, $1 billion for Section 811, and the list goes on. There's a lot of programs that receive a lot of funds. If you have any questions about what's in there, I'm going to ask my colleagues to share in the chat box and more in-depth analysis of all the different funding that's included in the bill. In terms of timeline, we expect the bill to get through this committee process this week. It'll be combined with other bills coming out of different committees and into a larger comprehensive package. It is supposed to get a vote on the House floor by the end of the month, and then it'll go to the Senate. This is really where we need your advocacy, I think, going forward. I think people feel comfortable about, or relatively comfortable about getting this bill through the House, but there's a lot of uncertainty when the bill moves to the Senate. We want to make sure we do not see any cuts to this bill, and we want to make sure that our top 3 priorities receive the highest level of funding possible. You might have seen that over the weekend, Senator Joe Manchin said that he won't vote for a $3.5 trillion package. He offered $1 to $1.5 trillion. In response, Senator Sanders said that that's a non-starter. So there's a lot of continued negotiations among Democrats about how big this bill will be. And we want to make sure that if that top line number is cut or brought down, that we're doing all of the work we can to make sure that housing investments stay as high as possible, especially when it comes to rental assistance, public housing, and housing trust fund. We're also seeing some uncertainty when it comes to other senators too. Just a flag for you, for example, that Senator Warner from Virginia said over the weekend that he was thinking about not voting for the bill if there wasn't more money for homeownership programs. We want to make sure that if there are increases to homeownership, which are great programs, but they're not, we want to make sure they're not coming at the expense of housing for the very lowest income households too. So there's a lot of need for us to continue to be engaging with these and other members of Congress as we go forward. So keep that up. I do want to say a little bit also about another bill that is also being marked up today in House Financial Services Committee as part of the same process. They're voting on a bill called the Expediting Assistance to Renters and Landlords Act. This is a new bill from Chairwoman Maxine Waters that aims to correct some of the underlying causes of low spending in the ERA programs. It comes after Diane testified before the committee, as Paul mentioned at the top of the call. She responded in the committee to recommendations that we've made and suggestions from other members of Congress about how to improve the bill. There are a number of really important reforms that are in this ERA bill that I want to point out. A lot of it is based on the feedback that we've been getting from all of you on the call through our state and local implementation working group, from our policy working group, and other avenues. So the bill would require that all programs use self-attestation for all eligibility criteria without the need for further documentation. We know that many places are using self-attestation, but maybe not for all the different eligibility criteria. This would make it a requirement, which we think would help expedite funds and streamline the processes for getting money out the door. The bill would also require programs to offer direct-to-tenant assistance to ensure housing stability when landlords refuse to participate in the program. This is already a requirement for ERA 2, but would be extended to ERA 1. So far, only about a quarter or a third of programs require direct attendant assistance. We need to see that increase, and this provision would get at that. Other changes that we think are really helpful are things like expanding eligibility or expanding what it means to have experienced a hardship to include those who experience a hardship during the pandemic, not just due to the pandemic. That's an issue that we saw with ERA 1. It would prohibit programs from requiring a written lease, which would help serve some of the most marginalized renters. It would also require cities and states that have low spending programs to put together an improvement plan outlining how they're going to adopt best practices and increase the use of dollars. And finally, it would allow nonprofit organizations and courts to administer funds when those funds are recaptured and reallocated. So especially in places that have very low spending, maybe there's a jurisdiction that's just not willing or able to administer the program the way that it needs to be. Now Treasury would have the flexibility, if the bill is enacted, have the flexibility to identify other grantees like nonprofits, like court systems, to distribute that aid. There are some provisions about that in the bill that we have some reservations about. There's a provision that would allow landlords to apply for emergency rental assistance without the consent or the involvement of the renter, but we are assured or feel better about very strong protections that are also included in the bill. Those protections were recommended by us to the committee and they included it. We were glad to see that. And we think those protections are going to help prevent landlord fraud and protect renters. So I want to give you a sense of what that looks like too. So the bill, for those landlords that are applying without the consent of the renter in the unit, the landlord would be required to not evict tenants for 120 days after receiving assistance. The landlord would be required to set aside and vacate any eviction judgment, rescind any eviction notice, and seal any eviction filing. It would direct state and local governments to notify local courts that the rent is no longer due and that eviction proceedings should be halted and that those pending evictions should be sealed. And finally, it would limit the ability for landlords to do this when it comes to vacant properties by only allowing it if the home was vacant prior to September 7th. And if the landlord didn't file any eviction notice, cut off utilities, change the locks, or take any other action to pressure the renter to leave. So we're very closely monitoring this ERA reform bill as it moves forward in Congress. We're going to continue to put forward additional reforms and renter protections to see if we can further strengthen the bill. I'm not entirely clear what the path forward is on this bill and whether or not there's interest on the Senate. That's something we're trying to suss out. But in the meantime, we want to make sure that if this bill does move forward, that it's starting from as strong of a starting place as possible. So that's the other bill I wanted to mention for all of you. Finally, I just did want to give a heads up that in addition to House Financial Services working on its infrastructure bill, the Ways and Means Committee is working on their bill as well. They're going to vote on their bill in committee tomorrow. And it includes a number of provisions that would help ensure that the low-income housing tax credit can better serve extremely low-income households. So I want to call out some of those provisions. The bill would set aside 10% of each state's annual 9% credit allocation, specifically for developments in which at least 20% of the units are for extremely low-income households. And it would expand the current basis boost, which is currently 130% and they would expand it to 150% for some of these developments. That expanded basis boost would be allowed for under the 9% and the 4% credit, but states would be limited. They could only provide that for up to 15% of their annual LIHTC allocation and 10% of their private activity bond volume cap. To help offset the costs or the resources that would be provided to help extremely low-income developments, the bill also expands resources to finance more affordable housing by increasing, giving a 60% increase in the 9% credit. So that includes the normal 50% credit that had been included in the bill from Senator Cantwell, plus an additional 10% to offset the ELI development dollars. It reduces the bond financing threshold from 50% to 25% for 7 years. It permanently expands the difficult to develop areas basis boost for rural and tribal areas. It closes the qualified contract loophole that many developers have been using to convert properties to market rate housing. And it makes several changes to the right of first refusal to ensure that nonprofits have full ownership rights at year 15 and beyond. So there's a lot of good changes that are in that bill too that we're also closely watching. And with that, I will turn it back to you, Paul, to see if there are any questions.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Sarah. Very thorough update. There are a lot of questions, and we won't have an opportunity to get to all of them. But there's one from Nathan Reeder that I want to address because this came up last call as well, I think. Will the bill, we're talking about the ERA improvement bill, require local state agencies to collect documents within 6 months after self-attestation? If not collected, will locals still be on the hook for the funds distributed to ineligible applicants?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you brought that up again. It's a good question. What that provision in the ERA guidance is referring to is when bulk payments are made to landlords in advance of individually checking every eligible renter and whether or not they fit the criteria. Under other circumstances, when you're not using bulk payments, when you're just applying as a regular renter to the program and you use self-attestation, you do not have that 6-month period to go back and provide additional documentation. The recent guidance from Treasury says that you can use self-attestation alone to meet these criteria. You do not have to provide additional documentation.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Ronnie Pollock asked the question, with respect to the $80 billion for public housing and $37 billion for the Housing Trust Fund, how can this progress be described beyond the dollars devoted to those purposes? Any thoughts on that, Sarah?
Yes, that's a very good question. I'd have to dig into that. We would like to be able to get to the point where we come up with a number of, this is how many units could be preserved through the public housing dollars, or this is how many units of housing that could be built through the Housing Trust Fund. It gets a little complicated to do that, but I can make sure that I can come back to this group and share updated numbers for next week.
Great. A couple of questions that came in prior to the call that I wanted to get to as well. One asks, actually, it might be two different people asking the same thing. Are there concerns about the lack of workforce available to build housing and expand infrastructure package effectively on housing? Do we anticipate a similar scramble with deadlines as we have seen with ERA 1, round 1 package? Another person, I think it was a different person, said New Mexico has already expressed concerns at the lack of subcontractors available. Any discussion about that?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I will say I think there's going to be a lot more flexibility. I don't see the same problem that we're seeing with emergency rental assistance with these dollars. Part of the reason why ERA spending is so slow is because those state and local governments were tasked with designing brand new programs for which they didn't have any infrastructure around. They had to wait for guidance. That's not the case when it comes to these programs. These are long-standing programs and cities and states should be very familiar with all of the rules of the road for that. So that's sort of a different problem, although this is a huge amount of money and it may take a long time to actually spend. I will say that there's a couple of things here that I think are important. One is that most of these programs have a 10-year window for spending. And so nobody's sort of expecting state and local governments to spend, for example, all $37 billion of their Housing Trust Fund dollars in year 1. That money can be spread out over that 10-year window. And they also provide a lot of flexibility to HUD to provide waivers when it comes to regulations or to set alternative regulations. to help ease that process. So for example, in the statute itself, they waive the 2-year commitment deadline for the Housing Trust Fund and home programs. That's something that could help alleviate some of that pressure to meet certain deadlines that might not be applicable here. And then I think your other question was about labor force. Yeah, so that's an interesting problem. It is something that I think we should be looking into more. My assumption is that people are thinking that if there is this increased demand for labor, that will attract more people to enter into the workforce and even increase wages for those individuals. There's also an opportunity to make sure that we're directing those jobs to low-income people through the Section 3 program, so that they are also benefiting as all these dollars are flowing into their community for revitalization and other purposes.
Okay, great. There are so many, but maybe I'll just ask you one more. Laura Massey asks, is there any accountability measure in the ERA bill? I'm asking this question from Massachusetts, where nominally our state grantee now allows direct attendance assistance with ERA 1, but in reality, nobody ever seems to be able to get it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We have one of the things that we're continuing to push for in the bill that's not currently in the bill is authority to be given to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau or the Department of Justice to enforce these renter protections and measures. That's not in the bill, but we want to see it added. And there's also one of the best tools that are really out there is for Treasury is the recapture and reallocation process. That's a clear place where they're able to step in and take away funds from programs that aren't following guidance or aren't spending down the money the way they should, and to reallocate it to those who are incorporating best practices into their program. So there are some tools that are available to Treasury, but we think more are definitely needed.
Okay, very good. Thank you so much, Sarah. We're going to now move on to the next segment of our agenda, where we're going to talk about reducing the stigma associated with participation in emergency rental assistance programs. And Elizabeth Linos and Jessica Lasky-Fink will join us from the University of California, Berkeley. Along with them are Desmond from the Office of the Mayor, Todd, Gloria, City of San Diego, and Melissa Thate, Department of Housing Stability, the City and County of Denver. And I think Elizabeth Linos will be leading this discussion. Elizabeth,
Yes.
you there?
Yep, I'm here. Thank you so much, Paul.
Very good.
Let me see if I can move the slides. Well, hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Linos. As Paul mentioned, I'm an assistant professor of public policy at UC Berkeley, and I run a research center called the People Lab that focuses on the people of government and the communities they serve. And today I'm really excited to be presenting the results of a collaboration between the City and County of Denver and our team at UC Berkeley. So on the call with me, as Paul mentioned, are Desmond, who is now the Chief Equity Officer of San Diego, but for the past few years has really been the heart and brains behind a series of data-driven equity projects through the mayor's office in Denver, and Melissa Thate, who is the Director of Housing Stability in Denver and has been the leader of this specific initiative. Also on the call, Jessica Lasky-Fink, who is the scientific leader behind this project. And I won't spend too much time talking through the purpose of the study because it looks quite similar to what city and counties across the country have been facing. But basically, like other places across the country, Denver had a lot of funding coming in to focus on all types of rental assistance. Of course, there is a huge need for people to take up that assistance. And like other city and counties across the country, they were looking for new and innovative ways to reduce the barriers that people face. The informational barriers to make sure people know that the program exists and that they're eligible, as well as kind of the compliance barriers and even the psychological barriers that might deter people from applying for rental assistance. And so in this project, we focus on about 62,000 renters who live in the 56 most at-risk neighborhoods in Denver. And what we wanted to do is test what it would look like to do individualized outreach to those renters to tell them about the program and see if that affects applications. Now, we couldn't send individualized mailers to 62,000 renters, so we picked 50,000 of them at random, and I'll show you what it looks like in a second. And then the remaining group operates as a statistically identical comparison group. And essentially what we do is send a postcard, an informational postcard to people's homes that tells them that the program exists, in this case, a temporary rental and utility assistance program, and gives them information about what to do to apply either by phone or online. And what I want to emphasize in this informational postcard is that this is both incredibly low touch and not high tech, but also no frills. It's just a postcard that gives people information. Because as a research team, we're really interested in understanding not only what happens when you give people this information, but what language we should use to frame government assistance. Instead of sending one postcard, we essentially send two versions of the same postcard. And to give you a sense of the difference, this is the same information I just showed you on the postcard that was in the informational postcard. And we tweaked some language on another version of the postcard that really focused on trying to destigmatize assistance. So rather than saying, you're not alone, we said, you're not alone and it's not your fault. Because of COVID-19, many Denver residents need a little extra help right now. Rather than saying, if you're eligible, you can receive an application, we said all eligible residents can receive an application. Because we know from our research that stigma isn't only about kind of internalized stigma, feeling like you're not the kind of person who should be asking for rental assistance, but also there's a real fear that you might be discriminated against or that you might be judged by the people on the other end of the line. And so what we really wanted to focus on is just tweaking the language enough so that people felt that this really wasn't a moral failing on their part. A lot of people needed assistance, but also that the city and county of Denver and their community partners were there to help every eligible household get the assistance they deserve. So I've highlighted the differences between these two postcards here. In practice, this is what people saw. So they either got the informational postcard that I mentioned before, or they got this destigmatizing postcard that looks quite similar. And in the interest of time, I'm going to go straight to the results. So what we see, sorry about that. So what we see is that applications did in fact increase quite significantly when we sent people postcards to their home. And the difference between the comparison group, which again is statistically identical to the people who received the postcard, is a 77% increase between that control group and the destigmatizing postcard. We see similar patterns for submitted applications. So we see a 40% increase in the number of complete applications between the control group and the destigmatizing group, or the group that received the destigmatizing postcard. But what is perhaps even more interesting or exciting for us is that we see a difference not only in the number of people who applied because they received a postcard, but also the demographic makeup of the people who applied. So in the control group, about 4.5% of applicants were Black. As we move up, the destigmatizing postcard moves that up to about 26.4%. And we see similar patterns, although not as stark, for Hispanic households. So what we learn from this study is really that it's possible to move the needle at least somewhat by thinking through not only how to do individualized outreach, but also what language to put on that outreach, how to frame assistance programs, not only in housing, but actually more broadly in government assistance. And what we're most excited about in this work is that these types of interventions can be very light touch or low cost and affect the number of people who are applying, as well as who applies, the demographic makeup of who applies. So I'm looking forward to hearing your questions. I'm sure we're not going to get to all of them. So if you want to reach out offline, I've put up my email and the People Lab website, but we're really excited to talk about this work and learn from you all as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was great. So one question that came in so far is, can you share the postcard file? I know I was thinking myself as I was listening to you, that there'd be a lot of people out there saying, geez, I'd love to borrow some of what your language. Can because it's so well laid out there, but doing it from this PowerPoint presentation, they may not remember it or whatever. Is it possible to share the postcard file? And is there anything else that they can access that would kind of guide them through how to do this themselves?
So I'll give a first answer, but I can see Kim and Melissa and Jessica can jump in as well. So from our perspective, absolutely, we can share the information, the postcard, but also the design, because a lot of this is about making sure we're testing what works. I should say these postcards were co-designed not only with Melissa's team in Denver, but also with the organizations that are dispersing the funds. And so I would urge you, if you want to do something similar, to reach out to us to make sure that you're really tailoring the language to the communities that you're serving, and to make sure that you are kind of correctly identifying the psychological barriers that the communities you are serving are facing. But we're super happy to talk about all of that and share this information through email if you reach out. We also have kind of a policy brief on our website that outlines the results of this study.
Melissa, did you want to add anything?
No, I think Dr. Linos said it all too well, so nothing to add. Thanks.
Okay. Right now, I don't see, except for other people saying, I too would like a copy of the postcards. I don't see other questions at this point. Really fascinating study and really powerful results, particularly on seeing that increase in African-American population. That's just phenomenal. And just increase in participation generally. That was great information. There is a question from Sarah Hasmer here. How long does Denver take to process applications? I don't know if you can share that.
Sure, I'm happy to hop on. So this project, I should mention, was developed previously under a different program. So we had a program that was launched in 2017, our temporary rental utility assistance program, which is what this project focused on. So kind of setting that aside, but we are working on deploying the emergency rental assistance program funds. We have seen recently with the CDC eviction moratorium ending a spike in applications, but we're working to process applications usually within a couple of weeks from the date that they're completed and submitted. And we've been partnering with our state division of housing to utilize the same online platform and application along with our state. So collaboration there as well.
Great. There is another question here. Did you test or see any differences by language/immigration status?
That's an excellent question. We don't have all that information right now, so we're limited in some ways, and both in terms of who we can do outreach to based on just information that was available, as well as what information we can collect. I'm not sure, I don't know if Jessica's on the call, I'm not sure on language. I know we don't have immigration status, but I'm not sure if we had language. But Jessica, I don't know if you are on the call and can jump in.
Yeah, I am. We unfortunately don't have language either, and in order to test something like that really requires, having a much bigger sample. Even though our sample is big, we would have needed even more people. So, but it's a great question and great opportunity for future research if anyone would like to reach out and work with us on that.
There's a request here, if we could, can you possibly go back one slide to see the Black and Hispanic increase in applications? It was up for a very short period of time. Very good.
So these are the results, yes, in terms of actual completed applications. So we see this jump in the demographics of who's applying.
Yeah, it's really amazing with the Blacks.
And part of the reason we focus on this is, of course, I'm sure everyone on this call is thinking both about how quickly to disperse funds, but also equitably dispersing funds. And this is, I don't know if Kim wants to jump in, this is part of a broader initiative to do kind of data-driven equity work that Kim led for this city and county of Denver.
Yeah, and to Dr. Linos' point, and Jessica and Melissa, thank you so much. I think it was important for us to be explicitly using a racial equity lens when doing this work. And so what you see here is just that. So when you're able to explicitly name how we looked at the destigmatizing language and the impact to racial ethnic groups, that's a part of the broader citywide commitment around why do work with racial equity lens. And so that's important just to say that there was political context around, not just from the mayor in Denver, but also from our county court judge, who also was a partner in this, thanks to the amazing partnership that Melissa helped cultivate with that side of the house as well. So just giving that context.
Great, and there's just so many comments saying how wonderful this is, how people want to learn more. We have posted the report, so that's available to everybody. Somebody asked about, do we send out a recording of this call afterwards? We will do that, so you'll have access to it along with the slides. So there are some other questions that are popping in. If you want to just keep an eye on there and see if there's any that you can respond to. But Elizabeth, Jessica, Kim, I don't want to be missing anybody. Melissa, really thank you so much for this presentation. It's really outstanding work that you've done and a great resource for everybody on the call. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
All right, very good. So we are now going to move on to our field updates. And our first presenter is Allie Harris, Educator Communication Specialist at NLIHC State Partner Texas HoUSed. So Allie, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, very good. Take it away.
Awesome. You can go to the next slide. So I am an educator and communication specialist at Texas HoUSed, but I also work on our Harris County Court Watch program. Specifically, I am the person who trains and manages the volunteers. I do intake, I do training, I provide support, and I also watch Harris County Court on the ground with my volunteers. So we have been watching Harris County Court since October 2020, which is Houston, all the way up to the present, which has been almost a year that I've been in eviction court. So far, our program has been entirely virtual, and we have about 16 justices of the peace or eviction court judges in Harris County. Only 6 to 10 of them have been streaming so far. I would say during peak COVID times, about 10 of them were streaming, and then right now we're at about 5 or 6. But unfortunately, as every week goes by, less and less judges have been streaming their eviction dockets. In the past year, we've observed over 1,600 cases, which, it's me, one other staff member, and the rest is volunteer powered. And every single time you observe a case, you have to submit this long form of information that you got from watching the docket, which means that 1,600 forms have been filled out or more, because we do quarterly go through the data and we merge duplicates if we have 2 people sitting in the same courtroom, and we make sure that the information from both of those observers is merged, like I said. So it's quite a bit. And I personally have done over 40 volunteer one-on-ones, which is it's kind of like an interview, although if you want to participate in our Court Watch program, you can. You basically just have to be available from around 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. Central Time. And I intake the volunteers because since it's virtual, it can be really isolating to watch court alone on your computer, even once a week, as I do. In Harris County, court goes really quickly. I don't know if any of you on there have ever observed eviction court on your own, but I've seen a docket of 30 eviction cases happen in an hour. And I know that you all can do the math on that. It can be horrifying, honestly, and it's a very emotional project for me because I'm spending all of my time on the ground actually watching the people who are getting evicted be evicted. And certainly in Texas, even though our rental assistance program is one of the best in the country, I have certainly seen people be evicted this entire time. So finally, we couldn't do this project without legal aids in our area. I wanted to thank specifically Houston Volunteer Lawyers, Lone Star Legal Aid, and Landwit, because we basically have an open pipeline to them. I'm not a lawyer, as I said, my background is in education and communications, So there are questions that come up, or a lawyer or a justice of the peace might use a word that I'm not familiar with and I can't figure it out. Or a volunteer will have a question that totally stumps me, and I can literally ping them. We have an open chat and they send us the answers to the best of their knowledge, or they'll look up a case number and help us understand what we observed, which has been immeasurably helpful. And without our contacts with legal aids, this could not be done. Next slide, please. So I wanted to tell you about what we've observed, and it's really hard to do this in 5 minutes, so please bear with me because I'm trying to cram in essentially like what I've observed for the past year. What I can tell you for sure is that of the 16 justices of the peace, not all of the JPs keep up with rental relief guidelines. And to be fair, and I will be honest, I don't usually like to defend the justices of the peace. The guidelines are constantly changing. And one of the reasons for that is we're in court observing, are the JPs keeping up with the CDC moratorium? What are they saying about rent assistance? How are tenants showing up? Are they showing up on their phone, in person, on Zoom? Are they disabled? Do they speak English? We're writing all of this stuff down. And we're reporting back to two main agencies. We're reporting back to the state rental relief program in Texas. It's called Texas Rent Relief. And we're reporting this information to the OCA, or Office of Court Administration. So one of the things that I do as an educator is I try to update them, right? So if a new emergency order comes out, or if the guidelines of the rental assistance program have changed, which is a good thing because they're usually changing because something about what they wrote didn't quite translate from paper into real life application, then I reported to the OCA and essentially tattle on the JPs. So I'm kind of like a professional thorn in their side, if you want to put it that way. I'm sure that you probably have some inkling that not all of the JPs, especially in Texas, honored the CDC moratorium. So there's actually a robust online system. I can go online to the Harris County courts and look up whether a tenant submitted a CDC declaration before court, or if they even submitted one in December. And I want to, if I'm watching court today, I can see, you know, was this person safe until the CDC moratorium expired? I can get that information. And we're also observing qualitative data, like what is the attitude of the JP about the CDC moratorium? Very few of the JPs cared about the tenant side of the story. And the ones that did would often ask about the CDC moratorium and why they were covered, whereas other JPs would blow through 30 cases in an hour, 2 minutes a case or less sometimes. And I actually witnessed more than one time, one particularly impatient justice of the peace would always ask a tenant, do you have a legal defense for non-payment of rent? And a tenant doesn't know what legal defense is. In Harris County, about 3% of tenants are represented by lawyers also. So, you know, they don't have counsel. And if they weren't saying a legal defense, they were just trying to say, oh, I got COVID and telling their life story, she would close the stream on them and just boom, click off, like not even bother with them. So we're recording this because there is no record of it, right? We have quantitative data. We have how many people were evicted, but how are they being evicted? That's what we've been recording as well. So I am going to skip down to the last point. Harris County is really special in that the county contracted with a nonprofit or community navigator called the Alliance Houston, and they are essentially rent assistance experts. And they are able to help people apply for rent assistance, educate people in different languages, hook them up with job information, hook them up with financial literacy information. And about 3 JPs out of 16 agree to use their services in the courts or even allow them into their courts right now. And right now I'm working on a report that we're about to publish that shows using these community navigators actually increases a tenant's chance of essentially surviving eviction court. So what we're trying to do is pressure the JPs to use these community navigators and essentially figure out why they don't want to. Unfortunately, I've heard through word of mouth that their reason is they've been burned by the rent assistance programs To which I would reply, a tenant that I'm working with who is a single mother and had to give her child up while she sleeps in a car because she was evicted while waiting for her rental assistance application to go through, I would argue she's burnt out on rental assistance. So like, there's just this, to me, and again, after watching eviction court for months, like the amount of burnout is relative to the amount of suffering. And I think the JPs forget that after a while because they have this like onslaught of interpersonal stories that they hear every day that it's almost like they become numb to it. So, okay, next slide. And then, so this is my last slide. I could honestly talk about this for a long time. So feel free to email me. I put my email on most of the slides because we have actually counseled with other counties in Texas to stand up court watch programs. So far, we've helped Dallas and San Antonio stand up court watch programs, and we're currently trying to help Ellis County. And our goal is to all use the same observation form and streamline our data so that all of our data matches, and that we can, at Texas HoUSed, do reports not just on Houston, but on expansive counties throughout Texas. So if you're interested, we actually have a course that I created called How to Set Up Court Watch in Your County. Honestly, it really is kind of geared towards Texas, but I think that if any of you out there are interested, you could take that course. I'm sure that somebody or in the chat can send you the link, or I can when I'm done presenting, and it'll at least just give you a beginning. And then if you want, again, you can always email me and I can try to help you the best that I can, but it is very different from county to county. If you're curious, you can go to HoustonEvictionSolidarity.org, which is our website, and you can actually train with us. Since it's online, we do have, I just intook a volunteer from Maine, and he's a student, and he's from Houston, so he's really jazzed up and excited to watch with us. And if you can't watch, then you can always follow us on our socials and boost our volunteer call. We're always looking for people. We have a lot of students and they filter out semester by semester. So that is my presentation. Thank you for allowing me to talk very quickly. And I don't know if we're taking questions, but I'm open to that.
Thank you so much, Allie. I will just echo what a couple of people just put in the chat, which is great presentation, Allie. And thank you, Allie, for your work. Just amazing what you are doing. It's very sobering to hear what you're experiencing, but it is so important what you're doing. I'm going to be using in the future, I think that maybe NLIHC can adopt this on the advocacy side, the professional thorn in their side. I think that that's a very good expression and very appropriate. But the court watch work that you're doing is just unbelievably important. You know, we have emphasized the importance and tried to get this into the legislation and regulations and get more ERA programs to use community navigators, which, as you point out, is just so incredibly important. But let's see, I'm looking to see if there are any other questions. It doesn't look like there is any, besides, again, just a flood of people saying thank you so much for this great information and thank you for what you're doing. So thanks a million, Allie, for being on the call today to share. Okay, we will move on to the next presenter, and we have with us Christina Contreras-Fox, Senior Policy Analyst at the Rhode Island Coalition to End Homelessness. And I am very pleased to turn it over to you. Christina, are you there?
Yes, I am. Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
Great. Yep, very good.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me today. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes, everyone. My name is Christina Contreras-Fox. My pronouns are she, her, ega, and I'm the Senior Policy Analyst at the Rhode Island Coalition to End Homelessness. I'm here to talk to you today about our role in the Providence Guaranteed Income Pilot. PGI is a pilot program that will provide monthly recurring cash payments given directly to individuals. It is unconditional with no strings attached and no work or education requirements. And you can find more info at www.providenceri.gov/MGI. The Coalition to End Homelessness participated in working group and community engagement meetings And we also were a level 3 outreach partner. So Providence is the capital of Rhode Island and the second largest city in New England. Safe, stable, affordable housing is completely out of reach for hundreds of Providence households. And here are some quick stats to help paint a picture. Providence is a majority minority city. Close to half of all residents identify as Latinx, and the vast majority of residents are renters. The renting wage is $24.54 an hour, over $10 higher than the average renter wage of $14.24 an hour. Providence has the highest eviction rate in New England. It is triple that of Boston. And at any given night in Rhode Island, 1,267 people will experience homelessness. And this number is on the rise. A near 100% occupancy rate combined with a near total lack of affordable housing plus systemic racism contributes to record housing instability and homelessness right now. The coalition is the state HMIS and coordinated entry lead, and our data shows that in the past 30 days, over 500 Rhode Islanders reported sleeping outdoors. To give you some context, that number is typically 150 people. So now I want to share some lessons learned. Number one, partners. Having an inclusive and intersectional planning committee is essential. Center your efforts in lived and professional expertise. This made all the difference in program design, especially in outreach and the application period. If you're trying to reach people, meet them where they're at. Trusted community organizations who provided assistance in applying, answering questions, troubleshooting in appropriate languages, culturally sensitive, made this effort a success. In addition to the Coalition to End Homelessness, and PGI project partners included the United Way of Rhode Island, shelter and service providers, policy institutes, and grassroots mutual need advocacy organizations, and others. So next, staff. You want to have somebody who leads this, so definitely want to hire a staffer. A project manager came on board who was interviewed and ultimately hired by the MGI working group. The person hired possessed professional, academic, and lived expertise, plus a bold vision for how PGI could transform Providence. Confidentiality. This was a really huge consideration at every part of the process and very formalized. This can get kind of gritty, so if anybody would like more information, happy to go down the rabbit hole with you. Just please email me. Happy to talk with you offline. Now, program design. PGI is not universal. It's designed to target a specific population, Providence residents with an income below 200% of the federal poverty level. And this being a pilot project, there would be applicants who receive payments and those who would not. To ensure the program helped neighbors most in need, we used a weighted lottery system when selecting recipient households. And all of us around the table were very adamant. This program would be structured in a way so as to not jeopardize the benefits that people were already receiving. Guaranteed income is meant to be a supplemental support. It cannot meet a household's needs by itself. We did not want this to cause further damage. We wanted this to help people be able to meet their bills, be able to get further ahead when it came to savings and financial needs. Now I want to talk about outreach. So the city of Providence invited organizations, nonprofits, community groups, et cetera, to apply to be outreach partners. And there were different levels, 1 through 3. So level 1, folks would be responsible for hosting outreach meetings and distributing flyers. Level 1.5 would be level 1 plus identifying potential applicants. Level 2, outreach partners would be responsible for hosting meetings and distributing flyers in English and also in languages less common than English. And level 3 partners, which the coalition was a level 3 outreach partner, was responsible for everything in level 1, hosting meetings, distributing flyers, but as well identifying potential applicants, but also assisting people in applying for the program. Materials and trainings were provided by the city, which was a huge help. And level 3 partners also received a $2,000 stipend. Funds for translation services and translation overall were made available to the appropriate partners also, which was very, very helpful. And so now I want to share what I'm calling FYI from the field. And I want to give a big shout out to my fellow staffers, Yanin Castedo and Alex Gautieri, the coalition's community organizer and statewide street outreach coordinator, respectively. They led our outreach and application efforts. And I'm reading their input here essentially verbatim. So thank you very much to my colleagues for your work and your help in creating this presentation. So number 1, meet people where they're at. Our outreach flyers included Alex's name. He was our point of contact. So included his name, contact information, and a message that he could meet you. If you wanted to learn more, if you wanted to apply, he just reach out, he'll meet you anywhere, anytime. And we also participated in outreach events hosted by partners like One Neighborhood Builders and other Providence organizations. It was very helpful to have so much time to talk up the program before application week because there was a set application period, which has since closed. But we got out and made sure we were talking to folks as soon as we could. This really helped generate interest and solidify folks who were thinking of applying. Alex assisted 25 people over the week. So people tend not to be interested if it sounds like a sales pitch to take their information and give it to the government when you're trying to get them to apply for PGI or excuse me, these types of programs. A lot of folks get services from the government and don't want to jeopardize it by giving away their contact information. And more people are inclined to pursue an application once you mention the free money part, but get skeptical when they have to meet with a benefits counselor or researcher due to a very valid concern about other safety net benefits being affected. However, folks, everybody was very patient. All folks were very patient to sit through the long application and very excited to hopefully be chosen. And one piece of feedback that we got across the board was folks saying that this is a great idea and they hope the PGI pilot is successful so that it can expand and help more folks in the long run. So now I want to talk about next steps. So the application period is now closed. Over 2,000 people applied and 120 were selected. My colleagues shared with me that they explained during the outreach period that the pilot program could be very competitive to get into. And a lot of folks asked what could be done to expand it. So there's room for advocacy here. And I want to share this last update that on the 17th, which I believe is this week, there will be a community meeting in the city of Providence to discuss how the city should spend its ARPA dollars. The mayor's office is going to advocate for more funding to expand PGI in Providence. And this could open doors to future advocacy on universal income in Rhode Island as a whole, which is tremendously exciting. So I hope you found this update useful. Thank you so much for your time and consideration. And if you'd like to talk more, please don't hesitate to email me at kristina@rihomeless.org. That's Christina, my first name, @rihomeless.org. And that's all I have. Thank you very much for having me on the call today.
Thank you, Christina. That's really interesting. Maybe you could put your email into the box. There is somebody who'd like to reach out to you for more advice, and there may be others as well. Could you just clarify again the relationship between PGI and safety net benefits and if whether benefits are affected by that?
Yeah, absolutely.
For other safety net programs, obviously.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, excuse me. The way that we structured this would be I'm calling it MGI sometimes because PGI is actually an initiative of MGI, which is Mayors for Guaranteed Income. So this program overall originated with Mayor Stubbs out in Stockton, California. I want to say either last year or the year before. And since that project was successful and demonstrated some really incredible outcomes in helping people increase housing stability, meet food security needs, et cetera, other mayors, including Mayor Elorza here in Providence, have taken up the mantle. But when we were designing this, we were, and I think this has been part of the conversation overall. So like, thank you to all advocates who have been, excuse me, getting engaged in this space. I think it's becoming more and more common, especially after, how much UBI, Universal Basic Income, was part of the 2020 presidential election. But thank you very much to all those advocates who are making sure that, this is a consideration that's taken into account, because I mean, this was something, it wasn't a big fight at the table to get the city to, structure this so it didn't interfere with other safety net benefits. So for example, if someone gets, if someone is selected to be a PGI recipient, they wouldn't see a reduction in SNAP benefits, or they wouldn't lose a voucher or a child care voucher, et cetera, or housing voucher, child care voucher, you name it, because that's just so important. I mean, one of the biggest issues overall the problem that MGI is trying to solve overall is the fact that people do not make enough, even if they're working over 40 hours a week, to be able to meet their needs. That's an issue. And if we can just give people, you can structure whatever innovative program you want and make people go through lots of different hoops, but at the end of the day, putting more money into folks' pocket to meet bills, like if housing costs money and housing is a human right and a universal need, then give people money for housing. So this is meant to be a supplement to help people gain more stability. It's meant to be another safety net. That's the way I see it. It's meant to be another link in the safety net or chain in the safety net to strengthen it, so that way folks can get back onto their own and and be able to have their needs met the way that they need to. And and nobody knows how to do that better than the person themselves. And as a point of personal privilege, I just want to point out, I really like the PGI program because I think that it recognizes the fact that when it comes to accessing resources, the system is still very racist, right? I mean, power and resources are concentrated in the hands of white, usually very affluent folks without any lived expertise. And the folks who tend to get the most resources are also white people. Providence is a majority minority city. Eviction, as I explained in my presentation, is a root cause of homelessness there. And the vast majority of residents are renters. And that goes double when you look at BIPOC Providence residents. I mean, Latinx Providence residents, 25% of us are, I'm Latinx, so I'm saying I, and this is as a personal thing because it's my community, but 75% of us rent, only 25% of us own our homes. And housing continues to be the #1 thing that people are needing help with. So let's give folks that help without a lot of strings, without aid that carries an assumption of, well, we can't give you too much freedom because you're going to you're going to spend it on other things, not what you need to spend it on, which absolutely isn't the case. So let's give folks a resource that will truly help them. And I think that this is potentially one of those new resources. But again, it's only one link in the chain of our net. What we really need to see more in Providence and across the board in Rhode Island is increased wages and benefits for folks and just more housing. I mean, there's a shortage of 25,000 households for houses for low-income households alone. For every 100 extremely low-income households, there's 52 affordable and available homes. I mean, no matter what you do, there will be 48 families that will have literally nowhere to go. So addressing that is really what we need to be doing and what we've been advocating for, but helping people better meet their needs in the moment now, which is something PGI does, is essential, and any step forward that we can take to do that is an important one.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Christina. And you'll be seeing in the chat lots and lots of people saying the exact same thing. This is really excellent. Thank you so much. Keep your zeal. So I'll let you read those. I don't think we have other questions right now. So thank you a million, Christina.
Thank you. Have a good one, everybody.
All right, take care. All right, we'll move on to the next part of our presentation. And this is Stacy Berger, who is an NLIHC board member, and the organization she leads, Housing Community Development Network of New Jersey, is an NLIHC state partner, who will introduce and share some information with us. Janelle Winter, Director of Division of Housing Resources at the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. So Stacy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Paul. And thanks to everyone at NLIHC and across the country for the tremendous work and advocacy that has been ongoing since the start of the pandemic. We are a proud state partner, and I am proud to serve on the board, and could not say enough things if I had the whole 90 minutes in this call about the great work that the staff and the rest of the board at NLIHC are doing to make sure that people are safely and stably housed. I've been listening to the presentations and taking copious notes because there are some really great ideas out there. I would also like to get a copy of that postcard that we talked about earlier. But I do want to just say that New Jersey has had a tremendous leadership under Governor Murphy and Lieutenant Governor Oliver. We went through Superstorm Sandy here in 2012 under very different leadership, and we had lots of folks who were not safely and stably housed as a result of the impact of that natural disaster. And so it's really with tremendous honor and pleasure that we have had to work with Janelle and her team at the Department of Community Affairs. They have stood up and gotten out almost $1 billion, programs for almost $1 billion in the last 16 months We ranked number 3, although in our hearts we're number 1. We are 3rd in the country for the distribution of emergency rental assistance program funding. There has been just one piece after another where Janelle has really worked to make sure that people are getting as much program coordination as possible. So if you're going to get vaccinated, you're also going to find out about the ERAP program, and you're also going to find out about LIHEAP, and you may also find out about other state services that are available. And I think that's one of the things that she has really done exceptionally well in this last rollout is coordinate which programs people are eligible for, making sure that everyone is getting every possible nickel that's coming from the federal government to make sure that people are able to stay safely in their homes. Our moratorium goes a little bit past, or a lot past, what other states have been able to do, and certainly beyond what the CDC did and what the Supreme Court overturned. So we have a little bit of a more complicated process because people are still protected from unneeded evictions or unlawful evictions if they qualify by being at or below 80% of area median income in their county. And so I'm going to ask Janelle to talk about the great work that they have done, her team, she and her team have done, including standing up phone service. We asked for 1 night a week. She did 7 days a week. We just have everything we've asked for has been basically has materialized. And we are really grateful to be partners with them, to receive support from them for the housinghelpnj.org website, which I'll drop in the chat in a second, and as well as from the New Jersey Pandemic Relief Fund, where we're able to help folks who are not eligible for or not able to participate in the federal or state relief program. So I'm going to turn it over to Janelle, because I know we don't have a ton of time, and I know she has a lot to say.
Thanks, Stacey.
Janelle.
Thank you very much. And thank you for your partnership. I think one of the things Stacey mentioned that we're working hardest on is coordination with our program. We have been able to get a lot of money out through our ERA program, and we continue working hard on that. But just as important for us is to make sure that even when we're serving at volume, we're serving people who are the most vulnerable. So we certainly are making sure that we are coordinating with our nonprofit and community-based organization partners like the Housing Community Development Network of New Jersey under Stacey's leadership, and many others, also with our Administrative Office of the Courts, as well as with our other state agencies. And a couple things I wanted to mention there. With the Administrative Office of the Courts, they are able to provide to us now, every 2 weeks, we get a listing of any eviction filings that have happened. So we are able to go ahead and reach out to everyone on that list. We do regular mailings to make sure that they are aware of both the rental assistance options that are available, as well as our the state's eviction protections. Earlier, not this month, last month, in August, our governor signed a bill that, among other things, provided additional protections for New Jersey citizens from eviction if they incurred arrears essentially during the pandemic, from the start of the pandemic till the end of August of this year. And if they self-certify their income and a few other things, they are protected, that arrears is converted to civil debt and they're protected from eviction. We designed the tool for that. There's a little bit of nuance to it. So we have both an online tool, but we can also accept self-certifications through our call center, which, as Stacey mentioned, is a 7 days a week center with non-traditional hours in the evenings as well. So that way people who can't use the internet, don't like to use the internet, can still participate in this process. We also work with the court. If somebody is already in a filing, we can have that sent directly to the court, that self-certification, to make sure that the filing is dropped. If it hasn't been filed yet, but it is later, we check our database and we can provide the courts with a list of the people who do have these self-certifications. And so we are working really hard to make sure that everyone who can be protected can, while we also make sure that all those folks apply for rental assistance so we can make landlords whole as well to the extent that we can. We also work really closely. We've had a great partner in our Office of the Attorney General at the state, and specifically the Division on Civil Rights. In New Jersey, we have protection from discrimination on source of income. So landlords can't refuse governmental assistance for rent. Sometimes landlords don't know that, sometimes they don't want to know that. Our DCR has been really helpful with us in terms of helping us develop materials that we can share with landlords when we're reaching out to them around these benefits, so that they know that what they have to do, that they have to participate. They've also done a lot of trainings and a lot of outreach to tenants and landlords to make sure they understand this. We've done a mailing to all the multifamily landlords in the state, letting them know that they need to post information about our eviction providings. And then we also, I'm sorry, I've lost my train of thought for a minute. And then one other thing that we are doing with that is when we reach out to landlords, we will do a direct-to-tenant assistance if a landlord just won't participate. But because DCR has been such a strong partner, we can really reach out to landlords and kind of make the case to them, look, you're required in New Jersey to participate. If you don't, what's going to happen is we're going to give the money to the tenant who will pay you, but you will also be reported to DCR, and there are consequences that can happen. And so we very often between our two groups are able to talk landlords into doing what they need to do. And just a couple things I wanted to mention that we continue to work to resolve. With all the changes, various eviction moratoria, being in place, being delayed, being lifted, being expanded, there's a lot of confusion. So we really know we need to do a lot of outreach to people to help them understand the protections we have and what to do. So our leadership has invested $5 million in outreach so that we can really work with on-the-ground community groups to get out there to make sure that everybody in the state understands these protections. And also what we really want to do is be able to have people do them right there. You don't have to upload documents. You just need to go online or go on the call center. We want to reduce that friction. So we're not giving you flyers, but we're saying, hey, let's do it right now, and then you're done. So we're really working hard on that sort of outreach with our partners as well. And then as we put the money out, we're just, again, working towards making sure we get it out as equitably as possible. This outreach will help us really get to the places we need to go and to the people who might not hear about it. Being able to take information over the phone. We have our materials available in 10 languages, and our call center is also staffed in English and Spanish and has translation services for other languages as well. And we're selecting rental assistance applications with rolling lotteries so that we can ensure that we're continually providing a priority for people who are the most vulnerable in that. And I think in all these things, as Stacey mentioned, these have all evolved from the discussions that we have with our partners on the ground. That's really been helpful to us in letting us know what we need to do and how we need to course correct and to do what we can to help as many people as possible. And I think that's it for me.
Thank you so much, Janelle and Stacey. New Jersey is really leading on ERA, and frankly, we wish that more states were sort of following your model and your example. We're a little bit tight on time, but I do want to just ask a couple of questions here, briefly, if possible. Does the call center have staff answering calls in real time? A challenge, Saren Hasman writes, with call centers in other areas that force people to leave a message to receive a call back can lead to phone tag.
We do both.
Okay.
We do both. And we've had some times where we've had really high volume and we've had to correct that, but we've been able to do that, but we will do both.
Okay, great. There was another question here from Kabira Myers. Thank you for these presentations. For you, Janelle. Is there a time frame within which the judiciary is providing self-certifying tenants with receipts, notice of case dismissal?
So as the judiciary, as they work through the cases and they receive the self-certification, they are sending out that dismissal. So I don't know, I don't want to speak for them. I can't say that there's a specific time frame, but I know they work through them as the cases come up.
Okay, great. There are a few more questions in here. If you have a moment to be able to stay on the call and see if you can answer some of these, that would be great. In the interest of time, I am going to go ahead and move on to our next presenter. But again, thank you so much, Janelle, Stacey, for all the work you've been doing. Again, keep it up because it is really a model for the rest of the country.
Paul, I'm going to drop my email in the chat, and people can send questions to me because I don't know that Janelle is going to be available, and
Okay.
I may or may not have the right answer. So I want to make sure I can stay on, but I want to make sure that we get the right answer. So I'm going to put my email in the chat, and anybody who didn't get their question answered, just send it to me by email and we'll facilitate getting the answer. I saw some of the questions in the Q&A, but I don't know how to respond to that, and I'm not gonna. So, because I've run these and I don't want anybody messing with my Q&A, so I'm not gonna do that to you guys. So please just, folks, if you have questions that are New Jersey specific, please send them to me, and Janelle and I will get back to you just as soon as we can. Thank you all for all your hard work, everyone, everywhere.
Thank you, Stacy. Okay, we will now turn to our NLIHC staff, Neetu Nair and Emma Foley, both of whom are research analysts at the Coalition, to talk about ERA spending tracking and dashboard updates. So I'm not sure who's going to begin here, Neetu or Emma.
I'll start us off. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, great.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We can go on to the next slide, please. Thank you. So if you haven't joined our calls in a while, I just wanted to provide an update that there is a few more indicators provided on the ERA dashboard. So we are now also tracking other housing expenses directly or indirectly due to COVID. And these include expenses such as relocation expenses, late fees, hotel motel stays, internet costs, and uncategorized housing expenses such as storage fees and pet fees. So if you get into the dashboard, you can actually select the programs and see which programs, which ERA1 programs are providing these flexibilities with their funds. And this is available at the site here. It's nlihc.org/ERA-dashboard. Next slide, please. So another program implementation criteria that we're beginning to track is also income determination, specifically identifying the 3 different flexibilities in which you can determine income via. Grantees may rely on these 3 approaches to determine a household's income eligibility requirements, and they are self-attestation alone, using categorical eligibility, or using fact-based proxies. So with self-attestation alone, Treasury encourages programs to offer this and rely on self-attestation to determine a household's income without further verification. And since this process needs to be recertified every 3 months, Treasury also encourages grantees to incorporate this in 2 application forms, recoding the specific monthly or annual income claimed by the household so that it's an easy and streamlined process. Another way to determine income is via categorical eligibility, and we've documented around 84 programs. That's around 17% of the ERA programs that allow for income determination via data from other federal, state, or local assistance programs, which include SNAP, TANF, WIC, and other state, local, or federal assistance programs. So these 84 programs include 22 states that are determining income via categorical eligibility. And the third one is fact-specific proxies. We've recorded around 10 programs, which is only 2% of the ERA programs that we're tracking that have included this, which is also inclusive of 5 states. That's Kentucky, Virginia, Connecticut, Delaware, and South Carolina. And these, while these processes slightly differ between programs, and they have different methods for calculating fact-specific proxies, they follow similar strategies, where these programs typically use publicly available data to infer if the household in either a zip code or a census tract or other similar geographic boundaries are below 80% AMI. And these use several data sources such as American Community Survey data, HUD area median income calculations, or even hard qualified census tracts to sort of build in income fact-based proxies. And these are often integrated within the application so that when applicants actually enter their address into the program, they're alerted to the fact that they don't actually need to provide additional income documentation, really reducing the barriers to apply for ERA funds. Can we go to the next slide, please? Thank you. So finally, we're also beginning to track data on Treasury ERA2 program implementation, which includes the $21 billion from the American Rescue Plan Act that was allocated for rental assistance. In Treasury ERA2, we've got around 482 total grantees, which include, 50 states and the District of Columbia, the US territories, and local governments that have over 200,000 population. What's specific to note here is there are 42 new local grantees that didn't really opt into ERA1 that are now running ERA2 programs. So these programs will be added into the database as and when they're open. There's $2.5 billion set aside in the ARP funds for high need allocation for eligible grantees. And in May, earlier this year, 40% grantees received 40% of their ERA2 funds. So that will, and once 75% of that has been exhausted, they'll be eligible for more. So far we've started seeing a few programs open up ERA2 programs as well and start disbursing ERA2 funds. And we've seen 3 types of trends. One with programs that have exhausted ERA1 completely and now are running ERA2. Programs like this include, Richland in South Carolina and Fulton County in Georgia. The other type we're seeing is running ERA1 and ERA2 funds simultaneously. And Philadelphia is, running both their programs simultaneously to, sort of use that flexibility in ERA2 to extend funds for up to 18 months. And we've also seen programs sort of switch over to ERA2 again for that additional months of assistance. The state of Maine is one such program that has switched over to ERA2. And as we identify more programs, we'll make sure to update all of our public resources with all of this documentation, and our public database will be updated with this in the coming weeks as well. So now I'll transition to Emma for some spending updates for ERA1.
Thanks, Neetu. So as of today, NLIHC is tracking that at least 31% of ERA1 funds have been spent or obligated. This is an estimated $7.75 billion paid or obligated as of today. This estimate is on our dashboard that Neetu already shared, and it uses data from the Department of Treasury, program dashboards, communications with administrators and advocates, and news articles. Next slide. We've largely focused on how state ERA programs are doing the last several weeks. And so I just wanted to take a moment today to highlight some of the local programs that have efficiently spent down their ERA1 funds. This table represents localities that have paid out at least 75% of their ERA1 allocation as of last week. And as you can see, local programs all across the country have excelled at getting ERA1 funds out efficiently, illustrating that with robust program infrastructure and low barrier program design, ERA programs can reach households with assistance quickly. Several of the programs listed here have already switched to their ERA2 funds, as Neetu noted, and some are also receiving additional funds from their state program. Next slide. And I just wanted to highlight a few of the best practices being implemented by a selection of these grantees, just to better illustrate how these programs are working. So in Louisville, for example, which has used their full ERA1 allocation, ERA program administrators have leveraged pre-existing relationships with community service providers and groups to conduct on-the-ground outreach. They've also formed strong relationships with courts to ensure that households who apply to ERA are protected from eviction and to inform households about ERA as soon as they receive an eviction notice. The program also increased capacity by hiring 18 college interns from their local university, some of which have now turned into full-time staff. Richland County has partnered with their library system, which staffs social workers within them. And the social workers provide in-person application assistance and help clients navigate eviction processes and other social services as well. Using this existing network within a widely used public service like the library has been crucial in reaching eligible households and ensuring that those households have supports needed to complete the application. Philadelphia has integrated very strong tenant protections in addition to their efficient program delivery. They've created an eviction diversion program within their ERA program where ERA program administrators regularly check in with the courts to keep the courts up to date on pending emergency rental assistance applications and to make sure tenants aren't evicted while their applications are pending. And then lastly, in Kansas City, Missouri, the program works with other legal aid programs and attorneys to expedite ERA applications for households at risk of eviction. And the program is contracted with 15 community-based organizations to provide application assistance, process applications, and make payments. The city and administrators have also stayed in close contact, meeting weekly to troubleshoot any issues and course correct as needed. This is just a sample of a few of the programs that are implementing very important flexibilities and best practices to reach renters quickly. Next slide. And then this final slide just links to our more detailed data on spending progress that much of our analysis is based off of. It can be found at bit.ly/ERA-spending. We can also post link in the chat. And lastly, as always, if you know of any data dashboards or other spending data that you would like us to include in our tracking, please do feel free to email us at research@nlihc.org.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Emma and Neetu. One really quick question. Could you clarify how states are recertifying self-attestations? Is the recertification only necessary where there's a continued rental utility assistance or future rental utility assistance being provided?
Yeah, so recertification will be needed when there's additional months of assistance being requested. What we've noticed so far is that programs have a specific recertification form attached to their application. So if households are applying for additional months of assistance, they can just fill in that form and just highlight places where their data has changed. So if there are fewer household members, if their annual income has changed, those are just things that they need to fill in. And then it gets compiled with their larger and initial ERA application. So that is the most common method of recertification we've seen so far.
Fantastic. Excellent. All right, we have gone over time a little bit. We just want to make sure that we urge all of you to do everything you can, reaching out to your members of Congress and encouraging them to support the housing investments that are in the reconciliation package. Now is the key time to do that. Again, emphasize the importance of rental assistance, public housing, and the National Housing Trust Fund to ensure that affordable housing is provided to people with the lowest incomes, that really get protected in any of the negotiations that are going to be going on. So thank you as always for your advocacy. Thank you for joining us in today's call. Thank you to all of our panelists and presenters, and we will see you next week. Have a great week, everybody.